explaining that this is an interview of Pauline Hochberg by Gary May, and the date today is Wednesday, the 12th of March, 2008. And Mrs. Hochberg, you understand that this interview is for the Jewish Historical Society, and that they will be keeping this tape for posterity after I've completed my part of the book. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Hochberg, you were just explaining to me some of the items that you have here, some of the awards and honors that your husband received over the years. You want to tell me a bit about that?
What I'm going to tell you first before the awards is that in 1945, after the war, my husband bumped into somebody by the name of Alec Betjeman, and who was also one of the top leaders of the Jewish community. He says, you know, Hi, you're doing nothing. Why don't you come and be the secretary of the Jewish community? He was just got out of the Air Force. And at those days, he wasn't sure what he was going to do. So he said, well, I'll come in and I'll talk about it. So he came in, and Alec Betjeman always said, because of him, he was the one that got Hi Hochberg to be the secretary in those days of the Jewish community, because there was nothing. It was on a little place on George Street. That's where he started. It was on George Street at the and then they moved to Rito Street, and they took over an old school, and then he still was secretary, and then before they built the Jewish community that you see that was on Chapel Street. Now, some of the things, the awards, I'll have to go through this here. Okay. He was given Award of Merit through the Hi Hochberg Jewish Community Council of Ottawa, Otto Vaudier, on his 25th year anniversary dedicated. They gave him this for when he was there 25 years, but he was also there 50 years. But this was the 25th. This is something that he used to go every year when all the executives used to get together from each one who ran each community. They would get together and have meetings during the summer, just the workers. And he was presented with this. He led this here. It's the Intermediate Cities Executive Institute, the Council of Jewish Federations and Welfare Funds, presents this citation in appreciation of outstanding leadership to the Institute as chairman in 1977 and 1978. He organized everything from all the executive directors, I would say, from east, where they were, they'd meet in the different cities. Sometimes it would be in New York State, sometimes it would be somewhere else. But I have letters from all of them, going back, way back when. And that's another one. Also, the National Association of Jewish Center Workers. He also looked after the Jewish Community Center before he let the center go, and then became just the Jewish Community Council, which was called Ravad.
Right.
And he gave over the Jewish community. But he looked after everything, the Jewish Community Center and the Jewish Community Council. He did that right from the very beginning. And this was in 1967 to 68. Samuel Bronfman.
Yes.
Samuel Bronfman's medal. For the Canadian Jewish Congress, posthumously recommended him to me for a lifetime of distinguished services to Canadian Jewry. That was April 1985, yes. By the way, that
Was very similar to that in the course of the national.
right, that's where the English became organized. Right, right. Okay. There's a picture, look at this, when he was in Israel. And he always dressed, everybody dressed in just shirts and no, he was always dressed with a shirt and tie. They knew him as with a shirt and a tie. Whenever he went to meetings, he was always in a white, because shirt and jacket, but always wore a tie, where the other ones just wore plain ordinary sports shirts. He was dressed like he was the big man, you know what I mean? But that's the way he dressed, always. What else can I cover? Okay. I have to show you the scrapbook.
Let me
Let me turn it off.
You were saying...
At Campanay Bris, he was a counselor at Campanay Bris. I was 8 years old at the time when I went to Campanay Bris as a camper.
Yeah.
In those days, they didn't have a doctor on, and in those days, everybody was crazy about him. Like he was 6 years older than I was. So every night, as he'd come around to all of the different things, and he'd say, "Did you do your duty today?" If not, he'd give you stuff that you hated to take. Everybody was so in love with him, and they liked him so much they took it. In those days, as I said, he taught me how to swim when I was 8 years old.
And he was a camp counselor.
And he was a camp counselor, that's right. Way back when. In the
That would be the 30s, right?
The 30s, right.
37.
Right. And then he was a camp director after that for many, many years.
After the war.
After the war. He used to spend his summers at Benabris camp as the director, and the other rest of it went to the Jewish Community Council. He worked there for the JC, actually it's called the Jewish Community Center, because he looked after both. It wasn't divided then, that a separate Jewish community and a separate Jewish Community Council in those days. And that's what he did then. And what else can I say? Better stop it.
Duty. That must have put pressures on the family at the same time, right? Because he may not have always been here for family occasions.
He was a workaholic. Let me go back to the year 1950 when we got married. We went to New York on our honeymoon. And what did he do? Before that, a week before that, there was a big accident on a train going from underneath in New York to some place in New York. And at that time, the Jewish community building was starting to be, it wasn't finished. So what did we do on our honeymoon? 3 days after we got to New York, he says, "Come on, Pauline, let's go down to this Jewish community center. I would like to see what they're doing there compared to, before this was done." Anyways, on my honeymoon, I went with Hi Hochberg on a train, the same train that was an accident that killed many people, and we went on that train, and we got all the way down to that place where that Jewish community center was, spent at least till evening there, and he got it asking information, wanting to find out about this and everything, and that's the way I started my marriage off. 3 days after, it was the Jewish Community Center. I must say that I knew that that this was his love. I don't know if it was his first love. I may be his first love in those days, but I think the first love was not only the Jewish Community Center, but the first love was the whole community. You know, he had time. It didn't matter how busy he was. If my daughter, who young at the time, would call him, and he was at a meeting in his office, he'd say, "Hold on to everybody." He'd swivel his chair around, pick up the phone, he'd say, "Yes, Lisa, what did you want?" Or, "Yes, Brian." He always never said, "I'll call you back." And they understood that. He was very good to his children. His family always came first. He was a wonderful, not only to his family, but to his mother. He would go and call her every morning, run down to see if she was okay. She was always alone. In fact, the day she died, he got firemen to bang into the door, to open up the door, because he hadn't heard from her. He was a workaholic. But you know what? He loved every minute of it. And of course it wasn't easy, you know, but I knew that this was his life.
Did you know that before you got married?
No, I didn't. But he became very friendly with my father, who was very much with the Jewish community. In fact, he used to come and visit my father and speak community work before he even started taking me out. I had gone out on a date, I had come home, and there he was speaking to my father, because they were both very community, they loved the community.
And your father, again, was
Barney Wise.
Barney Wise.
Yes,
That's
and he owned WEISS. Right.
Okay. So,
He was a workaholic all years. He would leave in the morning. Sometimes he'd come home at night after meetings. More was done after the meetings with the conversations than sometimes during the meeting. So he would come home at 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night from being all day, and he'd say to me, "Pauline, I haven't eaten. Do you think you can make me something?" Many a night I used to make him dinner at 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night.
Now, he was quite the negotiator, wasn't he? The conciliator.
Oh, he was, definitely.
Some people wondered what his point of view was, because he was bringing various people and various points of view together to kind of reach a compromise. But was there ever any doubt in your mind whether that he had strong viewpoints himself?
I think he did have strong. He had many strong viewpoints, but I think he tried to get the best out of both sides, so both sides would agree to it, and then he would later on finagle a way to get the real thing going. But he did it in a way that nobody else could do it. There was something about the way he spoke and to them and took them aside, and it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
So he was a pragmatist.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I guess maybe he was your typical Canadian in that way, that Canada is a country of compromises, right?
Yes. But he knew these men, these people so well. He knew them, and he never would say that it's his idea. He would get to them, it was their idea, even though it may have been his idea deep down. but he would never say, he'd say, well, you were the one that said it, that's very good, you brought up a good subject, I think you're right. After he I shouldn't say finagled, after he spoke to them in a way that sometimes changed their mind of what they really, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He had that way about him.
Now, I was talking to a lady the other day who's probably about my age, probably in her mid-50s, and she said that she always remembered Pauline Hochberg at the Jewish Community Center when she and her friends would go there for different events and dances and that sort of thing. And she said her recollection of him is that he was a very stern person, and she said, we were always afraid of him.
Never. Unbelievable. I don't know who he definitely was not a stern person.
He was a softy at heart.
He was a big softy.
Okay.
And you know, if the phone would ring, it didn't matter whether this person gave $1 million to the campaign or whether this person gave $5 to a campaign. If they called him, he answered the telephone messages. Didn't matter who. Not because they gave $1 million or they gave $5. He felt the people who gave $5 was just as important as the people who gave $1 million if they wanted to speak to him. And he would always call them back.
What did he give up for the Jewish community? What might he have done if he hadn't taken the direction that he did?
You know, it's the funniest thing. He used to say, of course, don't forget, when he started with the community, his father died, and he was 9 years old when his father passed away. He was the oldest of 3 children. And he took on the father image for the family. So in other words, it didn't matter what. He felt that he had the responsibility of looking after his mother and his brother and his sister. And that was always in the back of his mind. He once said to me years and years and years ago, you know, he said, if I didn't become the executive at the Jewish community, I think I would have wanted to go back to school and become a lawyer.
A lawyer?
Yeah. But he said that once to me. But he felt that his obligations was try to help his mother, support his mother, you know, in those days.
So do you feel that he considered himself a successful man in his career, or was he striving for something more than he was able to achieve?
No, I think he considered himself successful because he loved, you see, this community, he loved this community so much. How will I put it? This community was his life. It really was his life. From day one, everything. He wanted to make this community the biggest, the greatest community in the whole world, the way he felt.
Okay. Now, I have a commentary here that's written by Cynthia Engel.
Mm-hmm.
And
he used to be...
She was the editor.
Looked after the bulletin.
Yeah, she was the editor of the bulletin,
yeah,
and it was High who hired her.
Yes, right.
And she says that working with High was frequently a frustration, definitely in education, and always a privilege. Because he was such a perfectionist and because his fine hand was evident in every single aspect of this community he loved and served so well, High was not always available on demand. Thus we spent many a long winter evening together at 151 Chapel, clipping and pasting and working out headlines. And many a Sunday afternoon together with bulletin pages spread the length and breadth of the boardroom tables trying to get the next issue out, between incessant phone calls, none of which, to my great and frequently verbal despair, he would ignore.
Well, I must go back now with the bulletin. He started the bulletin in Ottawa. There was no bulletin, Jewish Community Center bulletin. I remember nights in the 50s when he started the bulletin. And those days, they didn't have machines that you put the, insert the bulletin into an envelope. In those days, the bulletin wasn't that big. So we would sit, he got my mother, he got all my family together. We would sit at a table downstairs in my mother's dining room, and he'd make all of us, and we all did, insert the bulletin, go through with licking the stamps for the community. I mean, this I remember before they got the postal meter and before they got the, the printout. And I remember going to the many times he used to go out and buy a bottle of liquor and go down to the post office, and he'd bring it down because, it was late and he wanted the people to get it on time. He'd go down in the back of the post office. Every Christmas he'd meet this guy and he said, "Do me a favor, I have to get it out, put it out on your first." Anyway, sure enough he did it, so he used to buy him a bottle of wine or a bottle of liquor and bring it down there. They knew him. They all knew him at the post office at 12 midnight at night.
So he knew how to get things done.
He knew how to get things done, yeah.
She says perhaps his greatest attribute was that high care. He cared sincerely and honestly for all those with whom he came into contact. There was no matter too small, no complaint too petty, no problem too personal, that time could not be found to sit down and iron out.
Didn't I tell you that he would answer a person who gave $5, or a person, he'd call him back, or who gave $1 million? There were nights when, after the meeting, he'd come home at 11:30. Before he came home, on his way home, I'd get a phone from Gilbert Greenberg, who was then president of the Jewish Community Council at that time. He says, "Hello, Pauline." He says, "Where's your handsome husband?" I says, "Gilly, you were just at a meeting. You should have known where he was." "Well, you know what? I have to speak to him about something. Tell him to call me." That was 11:30, quarter to 12. Sometimes it was 12 midnight. But that was part of it. Mm-hmm. That was part of it. The more would get done after the meeting, quietly, than during the meeting. Everything was sort of set. But it was really some of the phone calls. I used to get at 12 midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning I'd get phone calls. Because he was still finishing up. They left about 11:30 or 11 o'clock from the meeting. And he'd be cleaning up, getting his desk finished to come home. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I was noticing in the first few years that he was with the community council, some of the interesting little offbeat requests that would come in from people. Like, for instance, one couple sent a letter to him as the secretary of the council, asking where they could, how they could go about adopting a baby. There was.
I know that
people,
story.
Oh, do you?
I know many stories like that.
People writing him about work, about finding work.
Oh, yeah.
Searching for people they were looking for, helping obtain compensation after the war.
That's right.
There were 2 Jewish inmates at Rideau Industrial Farm wanting his help in getting them Passover food and a prayer book. So I guess that's, is that typical of the sort of requests that he would get over the years? Those things continue after that time?
Absolutely. The requests were, he didn't tell me everything. There's some things he probably felt, well, maybe I shouldn't say too much, because immediately if I was with my friends and I said something, Hi Hochberg must have told her that, and that's what's going to happen. And it wasn't because he told me. There were certain things, and I appreciated that he didn't tell me certain things, because then they would think, well, this is what's going to happen. I learned many things after the whole city community knew. But he was right in doing it. And I always said it's best not to say too much, because If he tells me too many things, I'm able to sit with my friend, oh yeah, I know that, I know this,
Right.
not meaning to do it, because
Right.
some of these things were not for anybody to know until they came out from the community.
Mhm. I was reading in the minutes, I believe, of one of the bulletins. There was a reference to the time when young girls, 13-year-old girls, were getting the new the bat mitzvah service,
Right.
the girls' version of the bar mitzvah.
Right.
Is that something? Was there controversy back in the late 40s about that, about whether that was appropriate and whether it was in keeping with traditional Jewish methods?
I really couldn't tell you too much about that.
Just kind of interesting little story. I was looking for someone who might remember something about the.
I couldn't tell you about that. No, I couldn't. Unless it was in those days when it was an extremely ultra-Orthodox rabbi who maybe in the early part of the years did not want that.
Now,
But I don't know. I couldn't. You'd have to go to...
Okay. Ottawa was quite Orthodox in those days, was it?
Oh, very Orthodox.
Yeah. Were there... Do you remember anything about any tensions or any pressures between the various groups in the Jewish faith? Any sort of reaction to the orthodoxy of the synagogues and the rabbis?
No.
Didn't seem to have much influence or effect on developments?
Well, there was always, I know that High was, during the time, the umbrella organization, the Jewish Community Council in those days. They always had special meetings with all the rabbis. And it was High that was, the umbrella organization where he got all the rabbis together, and they'd have meetings together. I can tell you that. I can't tell you more than that.
Okay. Did you go to films much?
Pardon me?
Did you go to movies much?
We went to movies, I must say, every Saturday night, because that was the only day. We got a sitter on Saturday night because he was busy every night of the week, and on Sunday he would go and finish up the work, because some of the men worked every day. And when didn't they work? On Sunday. So they would call meetings on Sunday. So it wasn't just a Monday to Friday job. It was Monday to Sunday.
Right.
And he used to say, well, Pauline, what can I, he says, they work all day. He says, the only time that they're available, I have to be available. And they would say, let's have a meeting on Sunday morning, let's have a meeting Sunday afternoon, let's have a meeting Saturday night, because they had to go back Monday and look after their businesses.
What sort of entertainment was there for young people like yourself back in the late 40s, early 50s? What sorts of things?
In the
did
late
you do?
40s and it was really the entertainment. It was really. I'm trying to think. Late 40s, the entertainment, movie theaters, and then most people we went to in Hull. In Hull on the Elmer Road, there was the Sachs owned the golf club, which was music and dancing. It was called I'm going back really, sorry, over the bridge in Elmer. And we would go there with a group of people, sit and have, enjoy dancing, whatever, and come home. That was about the entertainment. If you wanted to go to a movie, you had to go to a movie in Hull, because on Sunday they rolled up the sidewalks and all.
Typically
Everything
Australia.
was closed. Everything was dead on here. In those days, there was no restaurant here. There were restaurants, but nothing. If you wanted to go to have a nice dinner, you had to go across the bridge to Hull.
Do you remember any places that you used to go for a nice dinner?
I don't know if I should say it because it's Jewish community. We went to Louis Neuf.
Uh-huh. That was there then, was it?
That was there then.
Wow.
A number of places in Hull. Beautiful places.
Henry Berger?
Henri Berger, yeah.
Berger.
Henry Berger, we went there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, it was David Loeb, when he became president of the Jewish Community Council,
Mm-hmm.
and so David took us out to a place called Le Pied de Cochon.
Was that there then?
Yes, that was there then.
Oh.
And I remember going in there with the four of us, and that was the first time I ever saw a menu without the price on it, without what it cost. I thought to myself, they must have made a mistake. But it wasn't. Those very expensive restaurants never put a price on it. But who knew then, you know?
I hope Mr. Loeb was paying that.
Hey, David was. Yeah, David was, yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about a film that I saw a little ad for. It was a Jewish film, a Yiddish film, actually. It came out in 1948. It was called We Live Again. Did you ever remember seeing that? Apparently it was about European Jewish orphans, and it was the first film in Yiddish with some English subtitles after the war.
1948, I was like 20 years. I was 20 years old, and you know what? In my home, we always spoke English to one another. Very seldom. My father went to school. He came over when he was a year old and went to school in Quebec City. Went to school. He spoke French beautifully, besides English. And my mother was an American from New York, Brooklyn, New York. They came over. She came over, and my mother was 18, my father was 20 when they married, and they moved to Ottawa in those days. After that, but I'm just going really. But we very seldom spoke Yiddish. In fact, I was the only one that really didn't understand the language.
Okay. Did you have anything to do with some of the Jewish organizations at the time, like Hadassah? And
Oh,
that
yes.
sort of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, about the importance of Jewish organizations and women's role in them and that sort of thing.
The late Edna Goldberg brought me into Hadassah. It was called the Ruth Alat chapter when I was first married. The Jewish organizations, my mother was also very instrumental in some of the teas that they used to hold every week to make a little bit of money from and to give to charity. I belonged to Hadassah. I did for the United Jewish Appeal in those days. I worked all these little things, and I felt in my own way that there was sometimes when he was head of the Jewish Community Center, every Sunday there was a lecture. There was never a Sunday that there wasn't a lecture, or during the night, because I felt that he was there and looking after the lectures, you know, with the Jewish Community Center. I thought, well, it's right, being the wife, she should attend the lecture. And in my day, I always felt two things. Number one, I felt I had to be a yes person. If anybody said anything to me, if they wanted me to do something, I felt because of his position, I said yes to everything. There were things I wanted to say no to, but he never told me to do it. But there are things that I would have wanted to say no to, I didn't. Because I felt, well, I should really because of his position. And after he passed away, I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, you know, Pauline, time to do the things that you want to do, not things that you have to do. Look in the mirror and spell out N-O and see who you're saying it to. I looked in the mirror and, you know, the first no was the hardest no in my life, but after it became easier. I felt all those years, you know, I had spent being what? Also felt like I was hired by the community, which I wasn't because of my husband. And I felt, well, this is the time for me now that I have to become a person myself and do what I want to do in life, not follow knowing that this was the best thing because I was his wife. And I want you to know I was a very good wife, because people would say to me in the community, Pauline, I don't know how you lasted this long. How did you stay with married this long to someone who was a workaholic? And he was. He was. It was his love of the community. I don't think I ever know of any man to love somebody, to love a community, or love the people in the community like he did.
What do you think was at the basis of that? What made him like that?
I think maybe because when his father died early and he had to look after a family, I mean, when he got out, he was nothing was too hard for him, and if anybody asked him something, no matter how tired he was, he would do it. He would go to try to help them out. I think being in the position because his father died early, and he had to, I think that's what made him that soft-hearted person who wanted to help people. He wanted to help his family, and I think it more or less went over into the community. I may be wrong, but I think that's what it was.
Interesting. We started to talk a little bit about your part in organizations and women's roles in organizations. I came across a comment by Alex Betcherman.
Yeah, that's Alex Betcherman. I knew him very well.
In 1971.
Right.
And this was a report to the VOD. And at that time, he urged women to play a bigger part in VOD affairs. And I'm just wondering, do you know anything about what was behind that, or did anything evolve?
That had to be Hochberg behind that. Because, let me tell you, when every year, or if anybody of the men had to get up and make a speech in front of, if there was a big meeting, and they had to make a speech, and they had to know if they were the president of the VOD or they were doing something else, they'd say, hi, do me a favor, write my speech. By the way, he wrote everybody's speeches for them. You don't know that.
Yeah.
This Alec Betcherman, as sweet a man as he was, he couldn't read English. But he was brilliant and a very big giver he could read some English. So he'd call up Hi and he'd say, you know, Hi, do me a favor, will you? Will you write a speech for me? So Hi says yes. He wasn't the only one. Hi wrote so many he was a fantastic writer. He had the gift of writing speeches unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Anyways, he'd write the speech and he'd type it out and he'd give it to Alec Betcherman. Alec Betcherman would get up, hold the paper, couldn't read. So he'd take the paper, put it down, and he'd say what he wanted to say.
Oh, really?
But that's the way it went. I wrote everybody's speeches for him. Majority of people. The majority of them.
So do you think that it was High's idea that women should play a bigger role in...
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because Alec was the president of the Jewish Community Council. and he leaned on High for everything. Most of the presidents of the Jewish Community Council leaned on High, from the first one to the last one, because that's where they get all the information from. Mm-hmm. Even though they were at a meeting, High would sum everything up for them, so he could write it down. And in fact, High, I remember, used to have meetings before the meeting with the president of the community. Mm-hmm. They'd meet first. What are we going to do? What he should talk about at that meeting, and give him a summary. And High would sit there while he was up, and he'd listen, never let on that he was the one that gave them the summary that they'll read it through. Mm-hmm. Never said a word. He was the type of man, whenever they had photographers around to take for laying a cornerstone or something that was big or this, he never wanted to get into the picture. He always stood back and let the photographer take the picture of just those people of the head. Where today I see, I'm not saying it.
Is there ever a time that you know of that High didn't get his way?
That High didn't get his way?
Yeah.
No. No. Because it's not really, it was the best way. It wasn't his way that he didn't get. He got the best way for the community. Mm-hmm. There's a difference of his way and the best way.
Well then, were there times that he did something that he didn't necessarily agree with because he thought it was the best thing for the community?
I have to think about that. Well, if there was, I didn't know about it. But all I know is that they relied on him for everything. Mm-hmm. For every single thing. The president did. Okay. And he was only happy to do it. And he was a perfectionist. If there was a comma or something not written properly in English, and if it wasn't written properly, if there was well, I'm just using that as an example, mm-hmm. or a period or something like that, it would never leave unless it was 100% perfect out to the community, out to the public. That's the way he was.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I think I'm near the end of this.
Our first trip in Israel was in 1950. At that time, we went to, in fact, it was Alec Benjamin that said, High, you're working with this all the time. You should go down and see what goes on there. And I'm not going to send you alone. I want Pauline to go with you. So we went to Israel in 1950, in the 50s, and that was when, we stayed at the King David Hotel. At that time, there was the, I can't remember what it is. I have the movies. I have everything. Unbelievable, all the movies. He went to Israel after that about 10 times. He would make trips from Ottawa and organize trips to go to Israel. And when he got there, he'd always go to, and they treated the Ottawa people fantastic. He would take them to little places where the normal tourists would not go. That's how one of the places he went to was Metula, which is northern Israel, on the northern Israel from Lebanon and Syria were there, and that's when you can look over and see everything. The people of Matula, it was a small place, and they used to say to High, he was the only one that brought his group there on the tour, and they used to say, the mayor of Matula used to say, it's so nice that people are coming to see us where we are, because we're a small place, nobody thinks of us, but he always brought his group to Matula, and they would sing and they would dance and they'd have a reception for them. They didn't know what to do for the Ottawa people, and that's why in Matula, that's where you heard about the war was going on there. They built a building there called Canada House. Now in that building, that was really supposed to be the High Hochberg community. I went down there, but later on, the executive director of over more communities, I was called up. Would I give up the, and High had passed away then, would I give up the having it called the High Hochberg Center and name it after this other guy, the skating rink there, and the rest of it? There was a fight in the community. Some people said no. When the word is said, it should be said.
To Matula for High. Why did he think it was important to take people there?
Because it was northern Israel. It was small. People didn't go there. They preferred to stay Tel Aviv, the big cities, Jerusalem, Haifa, all the big cities, but never to these little places. And he always felt, it's important for other people to feel that they're not left out of anything. So he went there. He always brought his tours. Every year he had a tour.
Okay.
And that was part of the tour.
Okay, when in that speech in 1971, he's expressing some concern that people may not remember what it's all about, what Zionism is about, and what the significance of Israel is, and that he encouraged the use of trips to Israel to remind them of that. Do you know, was there something behind that? Was there something happening in society or in the community at that time that particularly concerned him about people's loss of memories?
I'm sure of it. It's like children, that have never been through the Holocaust. If you've never been through something, how do you really know what it's like? If I have a pain and you don't have that pain, how do you know what my pain feels like until you get that pain? And he felt that the more people that would see this and go to Israel, but I want you to know, he was Canadian first. Canada was his country. Canada is his country. But he felt that there were people that needed to have a place to stay, and they were shut out of everything. And this was the thing that people could come and feel like they've got a homeland. I met Golda Meir.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. The first president of Israel, prime minister of Israel.
How did he keep the various parts of the community together? What was that special ability to keep people talking and to reach consensus? How do you think he did it? How did he achieve that?
He had a way of if he wanted to do something, he had a way of achieving it by getting groups together, by getting the people, the important people that would have a following, and he'd get them together. And then, it's very hard to explain. He was a quiet, he never lost his temper, never ever. You never heard him raise his voice to anything. Never. He was a softie. He really was. Good question. I think it was his personality that did it.
Okay.
Not everybody could do it. You had to have that kind of personality to do it. Maybe 1 in 1,000 would be able to do it, or not get angry at them, but never got angry at anything. Always spoke quietly. The others would get angry. They'd have fighting amongst each other, but he stopped them. He was the mediator. He, and that's the way it was.
Now here's a little comment by, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Is it LeBeau? Stanley LeBeau?
Stan, yeah, Dr. That's, who that is, eh? Dr. Stan Labo.
Labo.
Yeah, he's a plastic surgeon. He was also, Stan Labo was also the president 1 year of the Jewish Community Council.
Okay, and here he's speaking as chairman of the
UJA.
United Jewish
Appeal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He says, how many times a meeting closed with High saying, Mr. Chairman, may I summarize because I am not clear on a few things, which to those who knew his style meant there were a few things he himself wanted to review for the chairman's edification. This was always done in meticulous good faith, a sense of compromise, and at times with a gentle push in the right direction.
That was high. That was definitely, that's exactly how he ran the meetings and how he ran everything. That's right.
Okay.
And he wrote everybody's speeches. Even people who could write their own speech, he wrote. He was a self-made man. He took over nobody taught him how to write. It just came to him. He could get up in front of people without notes, without anything, and he could speak and you could listen to. It was just something unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Now, at the beginning of this period, just after the war, there was still a fair amount of discrimination against Jews, wasn't there, in the community? There was quotas on people getting into medical school or
Oh yeah.
Not being able to join clubs like the golf club and that sort of
No, that's why they built their own golf club here.
Right. When did that start to change, or when can you talk a little bit about how that changed over the years, in those 30 years?
There used to be, and now I'm really going back some years and years ago with Lawrence Freeman and Bernard Alexander, who was Lawrence Freeman's brother-in-law, who was married to Lawrence Freeman's sister. Lawrence Freeman was very much in the community, head of arts, the arts and the National Arts Center. He was the first one, and he was in with everything. He started when the Rideau Club didn't allow Jews in the Rideau Club those days. And you had to be, I think, nominated before you could go into the Rideau Club. In other words, somebody had to bring up your name, or 10 people had to, before you could become a member of the Rideau Club. He was nominated to become a member of the Rideau Club.
High was nominated?
No, Lawrence Freeman.
Lawrence Freeman, okay.
You asked me that
Yes,
other
yes,
question,
right.
and I'm trying to...
Yeah.
Lawrence Freeman wouldn't accept. He says, unless you can let everybody in, I'm not. And eventually they did that. And then he joined the Rita Club. Now I'm going back years and years and years and years ago.
You must ask Margot Roston about that.
Margot, I know very well. I want to tell you who you're speaking to. I was named after Lawrence Freeman's grandmother, Pauline Bilski.
Oh, where?
When my mother was pregnant with me, Miss Lawrence Freeman's mother called my mother up, and I was the fifth girl out of 5 girls. If it's a girl, would you name her after my mother? My mother said, sure. And her name was Pauline Bilski. That's where my name comes from, Pauline. And it was when Lawrence Freeman used to see me, he used to say, how's my grandmother? I was a little kid like this, you know? But he used to say that because I was named after his grandmother.
Interesting.
But small little stories you're telling me that I remember.
Yeah. Now, there was another controversy that's kind of come up over the years, and that has to do with intermarriage, with Jews marrying non-Jews, because there's concern about, how are the children going to be brought up, and will they be brought up in the Jewish faith, and that sort of thing. And I was reading a statistic the other day that I think it was in 1945, maybe 9% of Jews married outside of the faith. And by 1965, it was 25%. And now, of course, it's much higher. It's 50%.
It's nothing. Doesn't mean anything today.
Is it that's something, a sense that has changed over the years then?
Life has changed. Everything has changed over the years. Today, you wouldn't see people. In my day, you couldn't live together if you wanted to, because then there was a no-no. Today, doesn't matter who lives together. They don't even have to get married, as I hear today. In those days, women never worked. They were always home, looking after their children. Whether they wanted to stay with their husbands or not, they stayed because it produced. They had something a roof to live under. Today it's different. The world is different.
So is that a challenge, do you think, for Judaism, being relatively small?
Of course. It's a challenge for not only Judaism, but for every religion, I think. I think it's a challenge for every religion.
Okay. What do you think, in Hai's mind, or in your mind, for that matter, what was his greatest achievement? What was he most proud of achieving when he was a significant factor in the community? Or what's his legacy?
I think the endowment fund, to make it grow so that the community would never have to raise money for anything. The community, they would get all the money from the endowment fund. I think it's the love of the community. There was just so many things that he loved about it, and he felt so many people in the city of Ottawa were so charitable, who loved the community too, like he loved the community. That there were too many things. I don't know what I could tell you.
Okay. So, but the endowment.
It would be a long list.
But the endowment fund was really his pet project, was it?
Oh, he loved, yes. That's what he wanted to do. And I said to you before, I said, he said to me, Pauline, whenever I'm old, he says, and I retire, he says, that's one thing, he says, I'd like to do, is work on the endowment fund. I mean, he died at a young age, 60 years old,
Okay. I think that pretty well covers everything I wanted to ask you about.
Good.
Have
I hope I helped you out.
Oh, marvelous.
I hope so.
Yes, absolutely.
From what I can remember. I want to show you that picture.
Yeah, let's look at that.
In the